Understanding Checks and Balances, pages 22 and 23, Judicial Review. One of the jobs of the Supreme Court is to determine whether laws are constitutional. This is how laws passed by the legislative branch and signed by the executive branch are checked and balanced by the judicial branch. The Supreme Court does the same thing with executive orders. If a president signs an executive order, the courts can decide if this order is legal or illegal according to the Constitution. However, the Supreme Court can't just decide to review laws and executive orders randomly. Its justices can do so only when they are making a decision on a specific case. And a person can't just go directly to the Supreme Court to have their case heard. They first must have their case heard by the lower courts, and if they are unsuccessful, they can then appeal to have their case heard by the Supreme Court. In this picture, there is a caption that says the interior of the United States Supreme Court has 9 chairs for 9 justices. Fast fact. The court's power to check the legislative and executive branches is called judicial review. Marbury v. Madison is the famous Supreme Court case from 1803 that established the judicial branch's power of judicial review. Page 23. Pathways to the Supreme Court. U.S. Supreme Court. Supreme Court, state Supreme Courts, state appeals courts, state trial courts. That is the state route. Federal appeals courts, federal district courts. That is the federal route. Checking the president. In January 2017, President Trump signed an executive order temporarily blocking immigration into the United States from 7 countries. Attorneys immediately filed lawsuits on behalf of the people who had valid visas and were denied admittance. When a federal district judge heard the case, he blocked part of the executive order and allowed these immigrants into the country. The picture has a caption that reads, "People at JFK International Airport in New York City protested President Trump's immigration executive order." Page 24 and 25. Keeping it in check. Federalism. In federalism, power is divided between the federal government and the state governments. This was a key issue when the Constitution was written because the framers were concerned about giving the federal government too much power. By dividing powers between the states and the federal government, the system remained balanced. The federal and state levels of government check and balance each other to make sure neither abuses their individual powers. States check the federal government. One way that the federal and state governments check each other is in passing amendments to the Constitution. The federal legislative branch has the power to pass amendments to the Constitution. However, these amendments cannot be added to the Constitution without at least 3/4 of the states voting in favor of them. Federal government checks the states. Federal law requires that all children in the United States receive an education. The states are tasked with making sure that happens. In the mid-1900s, many states separated their students by race, having some schools for white students only and other schools for black students. The federal government passed the Civil Rights Act in 1964, ending segregation. The states were required to comply with this law. Schools such as the Navy Hill School in Richmond, Virginia, shown here in 1958, were once segregated by race. Page 26 and 27. The need for a strong central government. The Articles of Confederation, the nation's first constitution, set up a weak federal government and strong state governments. The caption reads, "The Founding Fathers signed the U.S. Constitution at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787. This imbalance of power proved ineffective and problematic. The United States was almost like 13 different countries agreeing to work together if they felt like it. Something needed to change, or the United States wouldn't last. Delegates met in September 1787 in Philadelphia to revise the Articles of Confederation. But they ended up hatching a brand new idea instead. That idea was the U.S. Constitution. Fast fact. Several states refused to ratify the Constitution until a Bill of Rights was added. They were determined to protect the rights of the people from the possible tyranny of the government. Page 27. The Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, provides checks and balances to the people. These amendments guarantee the people certain rights and prevent the government from taking these rights away. Citizens can challenge unfair laws and violations of rights by taking their cases to court. The court can decide whether citizens' rights have been harmed and whether laws are constitutional. The 10th Amendment to the Constitution protects states' rights and individual citizens' rights. It says that the powers not given to the federal government are given either to the states or to the people. Power of the vote. One way to check the country's leaders is at the polling booth. At the federal level, people vote for members of the House of Representatives every 2 years, for the president and vice president every 4 years, and for senators every 6 years. Of course, the voting booth is also a great way to check the state and local leaders whom citizens elect. The caption under the photograph reads, "Voting is a very important way citizens can get leaders they are unhappy with out of office." Page 28 and 29. Fourth branch of government. The media is often referred to as the fourth branch of government. That's because the media informs people of what the three branches of government are doing. The media. The media keeps the people informed, which in turn keeps government officials on their toes. Because of that, the media is also called the watchdog of the three branches. This check helps keep the government honest or lets the people know if the government isn't honest. If government officials know that the media will be reporting on their every move, they are more likely to stay honest, and when they do not, the public will know and can take action to remove those officials from public office. The caption reads, Walter Cronkite was considered a trusted journalist. He is shown here reporting on television on September 23, 1976, during the first presidential debate between Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter. Page 29. Watergate. A famous example of this fourth branch of government doing its job occurring during the Watergate scandal of 1972. During that presidential election, there was a break-in at the Democratic National Committee's headquarters at the Watergate office in Washington, D.C. Reporters from the Washington Post discovered that President Nixon's administration knew about the break-in and had covered it up. A large-scale investigation followed. The scandal led directly to the resignation of President Nixon on August 9, 1974. Even today, many media outlets see their role as a check on government. Many other countries around the world do not have the same freedom of the media that Americans often take for granted. The caption reads, Former President Richard Nixon disliked how the media reported on him. During a press conference in 1962, 2 years after losing a presidential election to John F. Kennedy, he told the media, You don't have Nixon to kick around anymore." Glossary. Acquit. To declare someone innocent of a crime or wrongdoing. Amendments. Additions to the Constitution. Bicameral, having two House legislature. Checks and balances, a system of government that allows each branch to amend or veto acts of another branch in order to prevent any one branch from exerting too much power. Constitutional, in line with the U.S. Constitution. Executive order, an order or rule made by a U.S. president. Impeach, to remove a public official from office, especially for misconduct. Judicial review, decision by the U.S. Supreme Court on whether a law or executive order abides by the U.S. Constitution. Lawsuit, a claim or dispute brought to a court of law to have the judge or jury make a decision. Override, to set aside or make invalid, as when Congress passes a law after the President of the United States has vetoed it. Ratify, to formally approve a governmental decision, amendment, or action. Separation of powers, an approach to government in which the legislative, executive, and judicial branches do not infringe upon one another's constitutional powers. Tort, in law, a wrongful act that is not necessarily criminal but results in personal harm. Treaties, formal agreements between two or more countries. Veto, the rejection of a bill by the President of the United States.